After 3 years of research, I finally cracked the code on how to measure the value of a single backlink. Forget about domain authority, it is not as simple as you would think. Today, I'm going to go over 4 different things that you can use to measure the effectiveness of your link building so that you can stop relying on outdated metrics. You won't believe how simple it really is.
Joy, you've been working on this for at least 3 years. I think you've finally figured out how to calculate the value of a single link. Tell us how you did this. And I have a sneaking suspicion that by the end of this, DA might have a totally new definition, something like dumbass or something like that. We'll find out. You tell me. Maybe it is still all about DA, but I have a feeling it's not.
Yeah, so most link builders that I've spoken to use domain authority or domain rating as the main metric they look at to see if a site is worth getting a link from. Now, I will say that these metrics are meant to be useful, and a lot of the companies that come out with them and the tools that use them have giant disclaimers saying, hey, by the way, don't just use this metric. But what I find is a lot of clients, business owners, and SEOs alike just rely on this metric, and they're almost obsessed with it, to the point where you actually pay more for a link depending on what domain authority that site has. Now, I'll share why I think it's a big problem. Here's an example of a site that has a pattern that I see so often. They have a really high domain authority. So if you were paying for a link on this site, or your SEO company was placing an article there, they would say, oh, this is a good link. It's a high domain authority. It fits into this tier. We're good. The problem is, look at their traffic trends. This site literally doesn't rank anywhere. They ranked for a bit and then got slaughtered with an algorithm update. And this is a trend that I have been seeing on a ton of content sites over the last year with the algorithm updates like the helpful content update, but also the core updates that Google's been doing. So how in the world could you use domain authority or domain rating as your metric when it's very clear that this link is not going to be giving you any value if this site doesn't rank anywhere on Google?
So Joy, quick question. Now, we had a webinar recently all about the algorithm leak. It was a big deal. I think it was one of our most popular webinars. We had Rand Fishkin, Mike King, and Rand said something that was really interesting. He said, if he could go back in time, he would totally recalculate the DA metric and base it on something else. For those listening who maybe don't understand the history of DA, is there anything you can share just to remind people what DA is? Is it a Google metric? Is it something made up? What is it?
Yeah, so to be honest, I don't know how they actually calculate it. That would be a better question for Moz or Ahrefs. But what I have seen is that it's highly based on volumes of links. So for example, if you get 2,000 links, you're more likely to have a higher domain authority. Again, this is just the pattern I've observed. And the problem with that is Google's kind of came out and said this. A lot of the links that people get are completely useless, which we talked about in our last podcast. People are getting links from pages that aren't even in Google's index. And how in the world does that provide any value? Or if the site that is linking to you looks like this, then obviously the same thing is true. So I've seen this correlation where if you get a link from a site like this, your rankings don't budge. But if you get a link from a site whose metrics look much better than this, and they have a lot of organic traffic, your rankings will increase. And we've actually been able to measure the impact from single links for tons of our clients. We get them one link. We can look at before and after. We can actually see the ranking change. And a lot of times we can also see their traffic change. So it is possible. It's just people are evaluating these links with the wrong metric.
So if DA isn't a good metric to be using, what is? What metric should people be using?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that we look at is this organic pages metric. So the organic pages metric is not actually something that every tool has. I think a lot of Ahrefs competitors don't even have one that's similar. But what it essentially is this is the number of pages that rank in Google's index. So the higher the number, the better when it comes to a site that is a citation or a guest posting site or a content site. So for example, if they only have one page that's getting all the traffic, that is clearly not as good as having thousands of pages that rank and do well because your link is likely on one of those 1,000 pages. So we've seen that this metric is one that people should focus on, but nobody really talks about it.
That's super insightful. So other than organic pages, what are the other metrics that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, so again, 3 years to come up with this conclusion. So I'm hoping I'll save you guys a ton of time here. But the 4 things we look at are, first, is the page that you are getting a link from even indexed? I talk about this in one of our former videos that you can check out on why that's important. Second, see if the link is a followed link or a no follow link. Links that are followed matter a lot more for ranking. And even if the site doesn't get a ton of traffic, we've been able to see movement from followed links a lot more than no followed links.
Quick question for you, Joy, before you give us the last couple there. I have a feeling as soon as you said that, there's probably some people that are thinking, so should I just completely ignore no followed links when I'm doing link building? Do we want to touch on that now? I know we've got more stuff on that later, but just like high level, anything to say about that before we move on?
Yes, I'm getting to no followed links later in this episode, so keep watching. I will answer that question. The third thing you should look for is if you have the ability to manipulate the anchor text. I was frankly shocked at how much anchor text impacts ranking, and I'm going to dig into that a little bit later in this video. And then the fourth one is obviously the one I've already mentioned, which is to make sure that you check the organic pages metric inside Ahrefs to see how well that site is performing as a whole.
So Joy, I'm taking notes here, and I know everybody watching is taking notes. So just to quickly summarize here. So number 1, check to see if the page that's giving you the link is indexed. Number 2, check to see if the link is followed. Number 3, if you can manipulate the anchor text, that's awesome. And then lastly, use the organic pages metric in Ahrefs to see how well that site is currently ranking on Google, because typically the higher it ranks on Google, the better that higher quality that link's going to be.
Exactly.
Okay, Joy, so when it comes to link building, what do you do if a site gets penalized? This is scary, obviously. Nobody wants to get a penalty from Google. And, link building historically has always just been that thing where there's a direct correlation between the action you take and receiving like an explicit penalty from Google. What do you do if your site gets penalized because of link building efforts?
Yeah, I would say that penalties are probably the biggest reason why a lot of SEOs and business owners are afraid to do link building. The funny thing is that manual penalties for links are pretty uncommon. So I have only seen a small number of sites get penalized for links, whereas I have looked at hundreds of sites that, in my opinion, probably should have a manual penalty but don't. Now, I'd love to know if you guys have seen sites that have gotten penalties for links. Tell us about them in the comments. I love hearing these stories, hearing what they did, how bad it was, and what you think caused Google to actually pick it up and give that site a manual penalty. Now, to come back to your question, as far as what to do, if your site does get a manual penalty from Google, it's a really good indicator that whatever you're doing, link building wise, is something that you should stop doing. So you really need to sit back and evaluate your current strategy because it's not working.
So tip 1, stop what you're doing, reflect. You had some pain, now it's time to reflect. All right.
One of the things I've found is that a lot of people are just really afraid of breaking Google's guidelines. And this is where things get kind of funny, because Google's guidelines literally say that you should not build links in an attempt to manipulate rankings. Dude, that's all of SEO. That's all of link building.
That is all of SEO. Yes.
Right.
We could replace the word manipulate with improve, whatever you want to call it. But sure, you manipulate it across the board.
Right.
Yeah.
Our clients hire us. They want us to improve their ranking on Google. So as SEOs, we need to make sure that we are doing things that are the least likely to get them any type of harm. Obviously, that's not the outcome. But at the same time, you have to use strategies that actually help increase the ranking. And link building is a great way to do that. So this is one of those things where I'm just because Google says don't build links does not mean you should not build links.
Okay. There is a lot of buzz. You'll often hear people talking about buying links, selling links for ranking purposes. Let's talk about that for a sec. What does it actually mean to buy a link, to purchase a link? What does that mean?
Yeah, my stance on this has really changed in the last few years because I really think it's you can technically say any type of link building is buying a link, right? If somebody hires you to build links to their site, you are paying money and you are getting links in return. How is that not buying links? Like it technically is. Whether you're sponsoring a little league that's giving you a link, or whether you are paying an SEO company to do guest posting for you, or paying an SEO company to build you citations, how are all those things not considered buying links? Like, this is where I feel like people don't put them in the buying links category. But personally, I think they all are, because you're literally paying money. You're getting links in return.
Very interesting. And then there's motives, intent, all those kinds of things. But it really just seems like at the end of the day, no matter how you slice it, it's a subjective thing, right? Like, it's not an objective thing at all.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of services, for example, where you can pay money and they will connect you with journalists, or they will connect you with sites that will publish your content, but it costs the fee. And as a business owner, I'm like, you know what? Like, why should they pay for all this labor, put all this stuff on their site that benefits you? While you might argue it also benefits them, there's costs that have to be covered. So I don't think it's wrong to pay $50 to get somebody to list you on their website to just cover the costs that it takes their staff to like put the article live. Like, again, I don't think that is bad in any way, shape, or form, but this is where it's like a gray area. Depending on who you ask, you might get varying opinions.
So final question for you, Joy. Just before we were talking about buying links, we were talking about link penalties. Because it's so convoluted, like, what is a paid link? Is there any like correlations you see specifically related to penalties and paid links? Or do you think Google just can't figure it out because of the reasons you just stated? Like, if you sponsor a little league team, yeah, you're paying for a link, but that's just normal real world activity.
Yeah, so the unfortunate truth is I think that Google goes after a lot of the things that I mentioned that actually help. So they go after things like followed links more than no followed links. They go after rich anchor text more than they go after, website that links to your homepage, because those things actually work. And a lot of SEO companies will target those things because they work. So my advice to business owners and SEOs alike is, if you want to stay away from trouble and avoid a penalty, don't do things at scale. That's really where I see that things fail. If you start doing stuff in mass because you're like, ooh, this worked, I need 500 of these, the more you do it, the easier it is for Google to kind of pick up the pattern. So I do think that when it comes to link building, you really need to kind of assess like risk versus reward. And there is a line somewhere there that a lot of people do cross, and that's when you get into trouble.
I think that's a great conclusion and a great wrapper for all of that. Think of things in terms of what is the scale that you're doing it at, because everything Google does, their view of the entire world is always in this aggregated high-level view, and they're looking for patterns. So yeah, great point.
Yeah, and I would love to hear, like, do you guys build links? Do you have a problem paying somebody a fee for them? Do you think that's wrong? Like, there's so many varied opinions on this. And again, I would love to hear your comments and your feedback, because I think it's a good discussion, and it's something that SEO should really be carefully considering and kind of thinking about analytically, instead of just saying, oh, Google said this, therefore I should do this.
It's a great point, and also leads to, I think, one of our favorite sayings internally here that we've always used in relationship to Google business profiles, links, doesn't matter, is you really want to pay more attention to what Google does versus what Google says, right? It's the observation and the experience that you get over time that's going to help you be successful.
100%.